Hello and welcome to Serious Insights. My name is Kristi Campbell and I'll be your host. I am the adminitect at Cirrus Insight. And joining me today is Emilie Jenson, who is the Director of Sales Operations at Infrascale. Also, I know wears many hats and describes herself as being known for empowering others, excellent attention to detail, and her love of ambitious projects, which is a great segue into our topic today. So, hello, Emilie.
Hello, Kristi.
Thank you for joining
It's
us.
so good to be
If ever
here.
I do slip up and refer to you as Ekers, I think you will still reply.
Yes.
Emily and I know each other from the Salesforce Discord community, and she had made some comments about different projects along the way. And so when we started talking about topics for the show, this one we wanted to talk about build versus buy. So you've got, a new project coming up. And I think this, for any admin architect, becomes the question, right? Do you want to build something, or is there something you can buy? Combination of each. So we wanted to talk through that a little bit. You maybe want to give some insight as to why all those hats you wear, and or why I thought you might be a good person to talk to about this one.
Do you want to hear about the hats or why the hats?
Sure, both, all.
Oh, okay. I wear a number of hats. I'm a co-admin for Salesforce. I also work on a number of integrations for different systems into Salesforce and with Salesforce. I primarily started with the sales team as a sales development rep about 7 years ago, and or business development rep. I'm sorry, and then kind of worked into sales ops and became an accidental admin at the same time. And in doing so, kind of started taking over more of the sales operations side of Salesforce administration for the company, whereas my co admin took over more marketing operations.
Okay.
In the last year, I moved into the finance department. And so I've also started working on a lot of billing operations and also helping the co admin with um, marketing operations. And now we kind of just sort of like trade tasks, whoever has the nearest skill set or the
For the
time.
whole RevOps
So that
cycle.
helps with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I still kind of focus more on sales operations and the business processes than he does, but I do wear more hats within the organization for different departments than I used to, which is exciting. And I think it really is worthwhile for people who do have a lot of business systems and do have a lot of integrations into Salesforce to being aware of the different departments, business processes, and what their needs might be for Salesforce to fulfill on, for the systems to fulfill on, for the entire business. I think that having a holistic approach is good, very beneficial, and at least that's what we've seen over the last year of things shifting and people moving around in the organization a little bit more. And it's exciting. I really enjoy working on so many different products and so many different departments because it
Digging
informs
into
each other.
digging into all the problems and trying to
Right.
make things better. I think,
Like,
go ahead.
yeah. Like sales operations, I mean, it doesn't exist without like sales operations and billing operations, they go really hand in hand. Sales
Mhm.
ops has to know how billing ops needs things so that they can process the opportunities that get booked, so they
Right.
can process the products that get sold. It needs to understand fulfillment operations so that sales operations can support fulfillment operations and all of that. So that's it's always been helpful
Yeah.
for my position.
And I think too that kind of ties into this conversation in terms of really before you can even approach a build or buy conversation. I think that the idea of asking why 5 times and really digging into those requirements and really understanding that business process um, is a key part of it, because I think it's easy to hear one thing and be like, oh, I can build that, right? Or, oh, I just saw this a demo jam with this app that can do that. And then to potentially get caught up in other features and other things, but really trying to understand the core of the problem you're trying to solve before you even start trying to solve it, which seems obvious,
Right.
but isn't always the way it
I
goes.
know. Right. It seems really obvious, but I think having a strong approach is the hardest part. You can ask why is a lot. You can adopt different methodologies, but finding the right methodology that works for the people in your business works for you. Either if as a Salesforce admin, as a Salesforce architect, as a Salesforce developer, um, that's going to be key to your success.
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of it too is understanding what things are essential, like what things are it is only 100% fit acceptable for your solution, or is it
Right.
kind of, is there a good enough for now, like moving things forward kind of angle, or is a lot of, there's one key need but a lot of nice to haves, that kind of what you were
Right.
saying of, it does it make it easier for finance, even if it maybe does, the salesperson isn't the one that cares about that feature in the, on the front end.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And that's such an interesting balance, right? Like you have different philosophies in leadership, and those philosophies and how they see the systems can really impact how the users um, leverage the systems, right? So, um, for example, at one point we tried to make Salesforce the center of our system hub.
Okay.
Everything went to Salesforce. Salesforce was kind of the um, final destination for the majority of the data. But that wasn't always true. We still had data that was living in different receptacles and different types of databases that were homegrown or otherwise. And those other departments didn't necessarily want that data moving into Salesforce. Now, it was a decent philosophy, and I think it's a philosophy that a lot of other businesses utilize. But at the time that this philosophy was occurring, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, they weren't willing to invest in additional integrations or
Mm-hmm.
system updates to Salesforce in order to properly enable Salesforce to be the center of the data
Okay.
um, for the business, which it ultimately made it very difficult to do reporting because finance would count on Salesforce being incredibly accurate for its billing operations
Right.
and so on and so forth, or for due diligence rounds with financing. So that was an interesting place to be, and that really is kind of where the whole um, build versus buy situation for me started, where I had to start leveraging Salesforce, leveraging standard or custom objects in really unique ways in order to
Make it fit.
fulfill on certain business requirements, because they weren't willing to invest budget into new systems or into app exchange products or add-ons.
I think it's interesting too to think about. I think it's more, the budget feels like a straightforward thing, right? Like, do we have budget to buy this tool that could solve, is this magic thing that could solve all our problems? But
Mm-hmm.
um, also, like, what's the opportunity cost, or really the salary related cost of not doing that, right? Like, if even if you have the resources of people who have the knowledge you need, what does their time cost to come up with workarounds, or like you say, to
Right.
to do things manually, or to, like, the trade-off, I think, doesn't always get the credit it's due, right, for um, an alternative to buying something.
Right. There's a lot of different resources in the question, right? Like there's time resources. Does your admin have time to spec a new solution? Does your admin have time to research the variety of solutions that are out there for the business need? Does your admin have time to install it and then train users to use it? For me, the training of users was such big part of the equation. That a lot of the time, when I was considering, do I build it or do I buy it, I would lay very heavily in the, do I have to train people to use it column, how much work that would be. Because, you know, when you're in sales operations and you're an admin, I think that you're wearing two very similar, but they're definitely two very different hats. You have sales operations, which is very user-based, very sales-focused, very sales-driven. You know, sales wants sales ops to be available to help them deal desk, to help them configure opportunities, configure quoting, whatever. And then sales administration, you also have the other departments behind you asking for assistance.
Right.
So when you have that, you kind of have a conflict of fires, right? And then you add in user training into that conflict of fires, or that confluence of fires, and you're like, oh boy, how much do I have to spend on the phone training sales or reinforcing training with sales, and is that worth my time?
Right.
So I think, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and then sometimes I think the idea that, you know, you buy a tool that has training baked in or as part of an implementation package, but there's still an aspect of like, yes, certainly throughout the implementation, that's either your admin's time, your end users, a lot of time to get to that point. You've still got someone that's training that isn't a part of your business. So there's certain, or maybe I'm just a control freak, but there's certain caveats, right? Where it's like, we do, you know, we have you do this training and then I turn around and translate it, or then I get similar questions because it's more of a generic training versus geared to us. You know, it sounded like a good idea, but it's not necessary. Or when they actually go to do the thing and ours looks different, then it feels like the training falls apart. So,
yeah, it's so interesting that you mentioned the looks different part of that, because you know, getting hung up on user interface differences is a huge issue, I think, for human beings in general. And this is why smartphones, you know, when you switch from an iPhone to an Android, you're like,
what do I do?
What is this alien technology? You know, who are you? And why are you making this noise? And why are you giving me this notification? And I don't understand where to look for anything.
Right.
And then, and it's the same if you're, you know, moving between different operating systems or what have you. If your trainer or on the solution has just something just is slightly different. The contact page layout in Lightning looks different. You know, columns are in different places. The phone number isn't in the same place, or an email is, you know, slightly off to a different direction. And someone's been trained to look in the upper left-hand corner for specific information. You're going to have to do a retraining, like you just said. It's so interesting how little things are such gotchas.
Well, and especially for your salespeople, like you mentioned, you don't want them to have to think about those things.
Exactly.
You know, like you're trying to make a smooth process for like literally sales enablement, right? To enable them to sell the things, to keep the lights on, you know, and to try and make things easier. But sometimes the change itself feels hard. Whether it's your training or not. I mean, I probably over explain things sometimes, right? So because I'm thinking about all those little background things that matter to me that maybe don't matter to my users. So
yeah. Ooh, that's a good point. Like getting into admin nitty gritty stuff where you're like, well, this object does this, and then you gotta have this over here for this reason.
I had to do it this way
like,
because...
And they're like, I don't really care.
Come on, this is the fun stuff.
And you're like, this is how I stay engaged in this training. I have to think about it.
I'm reminding myself why I did it this hard way, because that, you know, sales reasons. Right.
Right.
But I think the other thing that's interesting to think about is, you know, we've talked about, you know, knowing your business and your specific requirements, but I do think it's good to take a step back and really remember someone's probably done it before, right? Like very few
Right.
issues. In the end, the broad strokes of what we're trying to do and support with the CRM, especially in Sales Cloud, I think are pretty consistent. So I definitely think that there's value in seeing either a product that is available or something, a blog, a video, or something of a walkthrough of what someone has done, um, just to see, really to get a sense of how hard it might be or easy it might be to make.
Right. Yeah, I think
Although,
that's actually. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, although then it's also sometimes easy to start somewhere, but then as the complexity grows, right? Either once you kind of start down a path, you've kind of got to think about the future of if they're going to start asking more things and then I've got more things I need to build, or if I buy
Oh
something,
my God, yeah.
can I
How
grow
is it going to
into it?
scale?
And then yeah, and then I'm susceptible to their feature release, kind of questions. I feel like for some reason
Mm-hmm.
I feel like sometimes with implementing new things, I'm like the roadmap builder finder where I'm like, can you do this? And they're like, nope, but that's a great idea. It's like, well, okay. So let's
You're like,
figure
nice
out a
release.
different
Okay.
way. Um, so yeah, sorry, I had interrupted. I think you had a thought
No,
about
no
kind of
worries.
you're not as unique as you think, maybe kind of sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? And that's where being parts of a community or like being good at Googling comes into a
Giving away all
strong
the secrets.
focus. Yeah, I know. That Google. Wow. Um, but I think so some background. Here's a story about something that I built without looking it up, if that's interesting. So you
Yeah.
got some hot goss here. And guess what? I built it all in Process Builder. So like mea culpa, these are my sins. Um
Hey, it could have been workflow rules.
oh boy, there were some too. But not so many. I've always hated workflow rules. And they serve a purpose, but
Sure.
very infrequently. So it was 2016, and I had, I think, very recently received admin access. Like
The power.
the power. No, it was 2017. It was a year after I received admin access. And previously, before I had done that, I would like just write these really long spec emails. Like I had done a bunch of research. I'd built this idea in my head of what I needed. And then I would send them to the guy who is now my co-admin. And he would eventually just lost patience, was like, just build it yourself. Just, you know what you're doing.
Here's a
I
sandbox.
think, here you go. And so 2017, and I discovered Process Builder, and I was like gung-ho. I'm going to automate I'm going to automate upgrades and renewals. Like I'm going to automate the renewal opportunity. I'm going to, create pipeline in the future for this renewal. And I think I spent like 6 or 7 hours in one of our conference rooms at our old LA office, and I wrote it all out on a whiteboard.
Okay.
The
Love it.
tiniest little handwriting too. I have a picture. It's hilarious. Maybe we'll include it in, show notes or something. But it had everything around like what kind of downstream processes this will entail, what is needed on a renewal opportunity, how are these going to relate to the opportunity itself. And, really looking back, like I wish I had architected it differently. I wish I had started with a different object as the primary, like, keeper of all opportunities, maybe a contract or whatever. And that's fun to reflect on. But I didn't Google a dang thing. Like I didn't look up, did anybody do this before? I didn't like no way. I was just like, I'm going to just do it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to gung ho into it. And man, I really wish I hadn't, because yeah, well, So the funny thing about Process Builder and things that you learn later is you can't debug in Process Builder, so you just have to activate it and pray. And so you activate it, and then you start praying, and it fails, and you're like, oh god, why did it fail? So you spend a lot of time when you don't do research into, did somebody do this before I did it? In finding the little bugs and finding the little gotchas. For me, it was, I really had to accelerate what I knew about automation in Salesforce within the span of a few weeks. And not a lot of people have the luxury of that kind of time, to figure out errors. Fortunately, the company was in a position, and I was in a position where I could experiment like that. But I don't think a lot of admins get to do that. I think that by looking into, all right, what are the limitations of Process Builder? Or, what's going to happen if I create race conditions in Process Builder? How many versions is that going to take for me to figure out? For me, it was about 17 versions. So I don't recommend it. Nowadays,
and is it out of curiosity, is it something that's still in use today? Did it end up working eventually and you kept it?
It was until last year.
Wow. See, so it's like,
I know, it was actually quite good.
It's an interesting balance. It's funny because that's literally something a project I'm working on right now, is the idea. So what we're doing right now for renewal opportunities isn't really robust enough. It's not, we don't have a great sense of, like you said, kind of a contract record, something in the middle that's really telling me what you have right now, that then helps make sure that your upsells and renewals just really stay tight, right? We can get there, but it's just a little harder. So, do I want to build something where I think I know what we need and I can see what we have, which is working okay, right? It's good enough, but I think could be better. Or do we look at a tool of somebody that has built something and seen other customers and what they're doing for SaaS products with, subscriptions, which Salesforce isn't exactly built for, and
not natively,
almost like stand on the shoulders of giants, right? That already they've already thought of all the things I haven't thought of the number of decimal points of rounding, and then, just one-time products versus,
gosh, I hate that,
subscription products versus like tiered products, just all the different kinds of pieces. And again, not just what we're doing today, but, now we want to introduce a new product that, or we want to introduce a training that's a flat fee, right? So how does that fit into when everything else is subscription? Thinking through all those things.
Right.
And do we want to bring in something where, and then partner selection becomes a big part of it too, right? If you've got the
you've got channel stuff going on.
Yeah, and certain tools, right? Even Salesforce does releases 3 times a year. So, and there's, plenty of prioritization and all that. So depending on the size of partner you're working with, if you do, make a suggestion or need a feature, then how long might that take to get?
Right.
And can you work around it? Which again goes back to kind of where we started, of really having your requirements defined. Like, I must be able to do this. And then if it's just kind of a nice to have, then maybe you can wait a little while.
Yeah. No, and I mean, it's interesting. And like, you and I have talked about this before personally, about, renewal opportunities and how do you do it. And like, I really did actually, after you first asked me that question, I think it was back in July or something, I spent a while, really collecting my thoughts about it. Like, what is it that needs to happen? And I wrote a pretty good blog post on it that I think I'll share with you later, about really you have to have a strong architecture philosophy before you implement things that have object creation based specifications, I think. Like, if the architecture philosophy is there, like it makes sense, then you don't really need to develop one. But in the case of renewals and subscription-based renewals and upgrades, I think that Salesforce does not inherently have that. Now, if you go and you sign up for a dev org on salesforce.com today, you'll have access to one of their newer features called Salesforce Billing, which is very interesting and something that, I mean, basically having a dev org caused me to ask my account executive about. So that's kind of another buy versus build situation. Do I want to look into Salesforce Billing so that I can have better native contract functionality, because it basically increases the functionality on the contract object and adds line items to the contract, which is just
of course
sort of sweet if you ask me. But it's, you know, that also is another like pro-con conversation. Are you using a billing system that syncs back to Salesforce natively? Like, for example, my company uses Zuora, and we have CPQ and Zuora 360 sync.
Whew.
So that enables us to push CPQ into Zuora, and it pulls data through the 360 sync. That creates a subscription object with subscription line items. But then there's the conversation of, what's your Zuora architecture like? Are these products coming back in a way that makes sense to a user? So last year, I embarked on a Zuora architecture re-architecture of the catalog.
Ooh, fun.
Where our products didn't make much sense because they were built with the architecture concept in mind of them representing product families. So you had a different product family for X, Y, Z, and they'd sync back as a product 2 object in Salesforce as X, Y, Z. But you couldn't assign pricing to them. You couldn't assign a SKU to them because within those products in Zuora were different objects that represented the actual product, the actual SKU.
Oh, okay.
So it doesn't work with standard products and standard price books in Salesforce, where you need to have SKU X and that has a price, or it has, 5 prices and 5 price books.
Yeah.
We had SKU X and it didn't compute to another SKU.
Huh. Okay. Well, and it's an interesting, I do think that coming into scenarios like this, right? I've only been at Cirrus for about 6 months. And I think it's important, especially coming from my last job, there was somebody who came in and kind of questioned things in a very mansplaining feeling, like, why did you do this? And I think it's
a little aggro.
Right. Well, and it's like, I try to assume that you did the best you could at the time with the resources and time and money that you had, right? Or the features that you had, right? To your point, just now we're getting contracts with contract line items as out of the box options with Salesforce billing, right? I haven't looked into it, but as that example, right? There may be something Salesforce has now built that makes it silly that you built all this custom stuff over here, or that maybe replaces the need for you to buy a tool. Not that the Salesforce tool is always the cheapest or, the right fit exactly. But, we probably did it that way at the time because it made sense, or because that's all the time we had, or because that's the way I knew how to do it my first year as an admin, right? Not that it was the best, but
process builder.
Right.
R.I.P. me.
And as soon as you thought you were getting right, that there was a time when that was the new great thing.
That was the cool
and
thing.
now we're on to the next new great thing. Hey there, we seriously had a lot to say about build versus buy, so we decided to cut this into 2 parts. So thank you so much for tuning in to Serious Insights, and stay tuned for the second half of the episode coming soon.